Welcome to the Anxiety Connection. If you've ever struggled with anxiety and are ready to finally get some answers, you've come to the right place. Hi, my name is Wendy Leeds, and I've suffered with anxiety my entire life. Thankfully, I'm also a psychotherapist, and over the years, I've learned a lot about anxiety, where it comes from, and how to manage it. That's what this podcast is all about. So, let's grab a cup of tea and talk about it. Hi, this is Wendy from the Anxiety Connection. Let me welcome you to our very first podcast. I am so glad you're here. Before I get down to business, I'd like to take a minute and introduce you to the Anxiety Connection crew. Sitting with me today is my husband, Tim, who is in charge of everything in this whole situation but the talking, right?
That is correct. Let's make no mistake about that.
Okay. Also with us is our dog, Miles Standish, and he would like you to know it's Miles with a Y, not an I. He's a rescue dog, and a lovely lady found him starving to death in a town nearby. She rescued him, and because she found him on Thanksgiving, she named him after Miles Standish, who was, of course, at Plymouth for that very first Thanksgiving. I'm telling you about Miles because Miles snores, and you may hear snoring during this podcast. Let me tell you, it is not Tim, and I'm not snoring either. It's our dog. And if you happen to know of a way to cure snoring in dogs, please, please, please be in touch. WendyLeeds.com. We would love to hear from you. Anyway, so now you know who's here. Let's get started. I thought today I would take this opportunity to introduce myself and to tell you a little bit about what I would love to share with you in this podcast. Let me begin at the beginning. I come from an anxious family. We worried about everything. And in fact, my father spent weeks writing long lists of things to worry about, from the interior things to the very corners of the universe. He wrote down all the things that concern him. I also worried, and in fact, if I thought other people weren't worrying enough, I would worry. I still worry for them. I am the DW, the designated worrier, and Tim, I think, can...
And there's no doubt about that. She worries about everybody and everything, even if it doesn't matter.
That's correct. It is my job. And if you are feeling like you identify, we are brothers and sisters together. Anyway, I was in my 30s before I came to the realization that other people weren't worrying the same way. Other people didn't have anxiety the way I did. I'd looked around all those years and thought, well, they're braver or they're smarter or they know how to cope better. But I realized that I had anxiety and it made a difference in how I lived my life. Maybe the same for you. Anyway, I was able to kind of white-knuckle my way through school. I got married. I had children. Things were okay. I could just barely manage to make it through the day until the doctor called me with the news every woman dreads. I had breast cancer. It wasn't just the physical part of breast cancer that was so tough for me. I did 6 months of chemo and had 5 surgeries. That wasn't hard. What was hard was the fear, the worry. What if it came back? What about my children? How would I handle it? It was an ongoing worry and misery for actually years. And then I had a miracle. Someone said to me, why don't you read this book? And someone quickly said, why don't you read that book? And I did what they said, and I started reading, and I found I couldn't stop. I read everything I could find on anxiety. I got so excited to know that, first of all, I wasn't the only one who was suffering like this. And secondly, lots of people had lots of really good ideas about ways to make it better. I read, and finally, I went back to graduate school. got 2 degrees, and became a psychotherapist. I just kept learning and sharing what I'd learned with my clients. I was thinking that I had life exactly the way I wanted. I was joyful, I was happy, until my doctor called again to say I had leukemia. Unbelievable. Cancer again. Anyway, this time, the second time was easier because I had collected these tools and techniques over the years. I knew how to ease my anxiety. I knew how to help myself. I reached out for support. I went to acupuncture. I talked to a therapist. I did everything I'm going to recommend and share with you. And it was easier. It was easier. And lest you think the story ends here, let me share with you last year, almost a year ago, this time, I was diagnosed with a relapse of leukemia. I finished my last round of chemo last April, and I'm happy to say that I feel great today. But there is still the anxiety. I wish I could say it was easy. I wish I could say I breezed through cancer treatment. I'm still anxious, but boy, is it easier. Boy, do I know things about how to handle anxiety. And my dream for this podcast, The Anxiety Connection, actually it's Our Anxiety Connection, is it's a place where we can come together to share what we know, to learn together, and to allow this to be a place where we find ease and peace in our life. I'm going to talk to Tim about what it's like to live with someone who's anxious. And do you have any thoughts about that?
Well, it certainly is challenging and a little interesting to see how Wendy deals with the anxiety that is her life around her.
Yes.
And it brings interesting life situations into our lives. And it's just interesting to watch how Wendy handles all of it.
And we're going to hear more from him because I think that anxious people have to deal with that anxiety in their relationships. We'll look at relationships. We'll look at work, at home, at your daily living habits. So many things to share. And I want, more than anything, to take the stigma and the shame out of being anxious. As I've gone through my life and I share what I do with people, I am stunned when I say, well, I'm concerned about helping people with anxiety, at the people who say back to me, oh, I am so anxious, but don't tell anybody. Oh, my sister can't leave the house. Oh, my family. Oh, my child. Anxiety is everywhere. And women are twice as likely to be diagnosed with anxiety. And we'll get into that down the road. We are an anxious people and we are getting more anxious. But the truth is, there are all sorts of things we can do together to help ease that anxiety. So before I end, let me ask you, what would your life have looked like without anxiety? What would you have done? You know, that party you didn't go to, or the trip you didn't take, or the person you didn't meet, or the job you turned down because you were anxious? That's quite a price if it's like my life. Boy, there are some regrets. But now let's ask this. What would your life look like if going forward we found ways to help you feel better? What would you like to do? What trip would you take? What adventure would you tackle? What job would you really like? What would you like your relationships to look like? Where would you like to live? Think about what your life could look like if we could find ways to tackle that anxiety together. That's what we're talking about at Our Anxiety Connection. If you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe and come back next week and we'll talk more about living your best life. Until then, I wish you peace, joy, and love.